It's only years after I found out that a full investigation was launched on me. And that's when I started to understand the importance of your reputation, how you treat people, how you deal with people, how you are perceived by others, because that was very important in landing me that job.
Hey, and welcome back to Pathways, the podcast where we talk with West Indians who are out here at home or in the diaspora, making work for them. These are the folks who are out there charting their own paths, figuring things out in a non-traditional field or just in an uncommon way. If you're looking for some inspiration on where to take things in your own career, or you just like hearing about what others are doing and how they've gotten to where they are, then stick around. You can be a fly on the wall of my conversation with them. And maybe you'll take something away to use in your own life. When you're done, leave a comment and let us know what you liked or what you want to hear more of. And now, let's get into the episode.
Today's guest is Miss Rosana John-Mitchell. Rosana is an attorney at law with over 10 years of post-qualification experience. She holds a Master of Laws in Environmental Law and Policy from University College London, achieved through a Chevening Scholarship. Rosana currently practices with Dentons, a leading global law firm where she specializes in real estate and corporate sustainability, or ESG, advising clients in Grenada and the wider Caribbean region. In addition to her legal career, Rosana is deeply committed to community and leadership. She's an active member of the Rotary Club of Grenada and Caribbean Women in Leadership, or CIWIL, and she serves as a director of the Grenada Sustainable Development Trust Fund, Inc., contributing to sustainable initiatives across the island. Rosana's entrepreneurial spirit is evident as the co-founder of Spice Foodie Tours, a flourishing business that highlights local culinary experiences while promoting community-based tourism in Grenada. Outside of her professional endeavors, Rosana is a passionate content creator for her Instagram microblog, Radical Rose Eats, where she shares culinary reviews and local experiences. She also embraces an active lifestyle through fitness and enjoys exploring the world through travel. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Rosana John-Mitchell. Hi, Rosana, and welcome to Pathways.
Hi, Arlene. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So we are going to get started just giving people an overview of who you are. And I'll do that by asking a few simple questions. So to get started, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Grenada, more specifically Hermitage St. Patrick. So the first 10 years of my life were spent there. And I went to St. Patrick's RSC school. So that's a surprise to a lot of people.
Didn't know that. Okay. And do you remember back then, like, what were you like as a young student? And was there something that you wanted to be when you grew up?
I've always been very bookish. Like, I've always loved reading. I've always had a thirst for knowledge. I've always been very intrinsically motivated. So I wasn't a child and my mother had to be on my back to do my homework or anything. Like, I just genuinely wanted to learn. Like, I remember in like standard 1, before they changed the grades, like I was excited about like getting homework and like those little things excited me. So perhaps I was a little odd. But yeah, so I was always a very bookish, studious person. In terms of what I wanted to be, it wasn't linear. Like, I wasn't a child that always knew what I wanted to do. So by contrast, I have one brother. Mm-hmm. And ever since I remember, we're a year apart, he has always wanted to be a pilot. Like, it has been very clear. Yeah. It hasn't been that clear for me, even to this day. You know, I am still, I wouldn't say searching, but I am, if you ask me in 5 years, I may not be doing the same things that I'm doing now. So in terms of when I analyze the common thread, in terms of all the different things I've considered, is at this core, it's about helping people. Like, I remember the very first thing I wanted to be was to be a nun. because I grew up very Catholic. I
Okay.
wanted to, to help and do that sort of thing. And then as I got older and I learned about like the vows, like the biggest vow I had an issue with was actually obedience. Like chastity and poverty were like, okay, I could probably deal with that. But like obedience, like when the church says I have to go here and I have to go there and I can't question because it's his holy will and that sort of thing, I was like, I think I would have a problem with with that. But I wanted to be a doctor. I think anybody who is remotely bright in the Caribbean is expected to be a doctor, and that's pushed on you.
Mm-hmm.
So for a while, I entertained it, and then I was like, I don't even like blood. I can't deal with blood. I'm so squeamish. So I'm
Right.
like, how else can I fit into this doctor mold? Maybe I should be a psychiatrist because I had an interest in mental health,
Mm.
particularly looking at shows like Law and Order and House and those kind of things.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, medicine is just not for me. So like I ventured, like, so law is what I currently do.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a linear path to get there at all. Because even
Okay.
when I applied at university, that's not what I applied to do. So I went to University of the West Indies and I actually applied to do political science and law.
Mm.
And it was just because I found the courses interesting. I looked at the course outlines and I'm like, I like how these courses sound. I don't think at the time I seriously reflected on like a career trajectory or what I would actually do with it. I
Yeah.
just ended up choosing it because I found it interesting. And then I
Okay.
had to change my majors because when I got there, I got the brutal reality of what are you going to do with this degree?
Mm.
So both my law lecturers, my political science lecturers, like I had, like they pulled me aside separately and was like, you have to choose a path. We don't know why we offers this mixed degree, but in terms of like your higher ability,
Yeah.
it's better to choose one or the other. And that's when I know a dose of reality hit me, and it's like, okay, law is a more marketable skill in the Caribbean than
Mm.
political science. So that's how I ventured down that path and have been on that path for the past 10 years.
Okay. Very interesting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. But all right. So based on that, if we, I guess, rewind a little bit, going through the motions, I guess, through secondary school, having to choose subjects and having this kind of, I guess, no real direction on where you wanted to go. How did you go about that part of your life? Like, how are you choosing your subjects? I believe you went on to TAMCC.
Yes.
Yeah. So like how did you make your choices at that stage?
So I think the challenge for me as a studious person is that I was good at everything.
At
Not to
everything.
sound, but I was like, I excelled in all my subjects. I was the child that came first and second throughout consistently. So
Mm-hmm.
like, it was like, I can do anything I want. And I distinctively remember in Form 3, when you have to, choose your subjects, I really wasn't clear on what I wanted to do. So I'm like, perhaps I should just do a good combination of arts and science.
Mm.
And I remember I sat down because we had to sit with the teachers and choose our subjects. And the teacher was like, okay, physics, chemistry, math, what else are you doing? Like they're not math, sorry, physics, chemistry, biology. And they take that off already. And it's like, so
Yeah.
what else is left to do? So then I picked, the French and the Spanish and the history and the IT. So I did a broad range of subjects. So initially I was actually doing 12 subjects because
Okay.
I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. So it was quite a wide range. I ended up dropping art because it was conflicting with another one. I was just becoming too stressful having to do subjects that clashed. I think I was
Yeah.
already doing other subjects that clashed. So for persons who may not be familiar, once you pick your subjects and you go on to Form 4 and 5, different classes could be going on concurrently. So you may not be able to do two subjects at the same time. So you may have to take extra classes, doing it after school. So that was stressful. So back then, this was what, 2006? Doing that number of subjects was considered a lot. I know now people do 20 something,
Crazy.
but back then, doing 12 and 11 subjects was considered heavy. So I already had a lot on my plate. So my plan was just to choose as widely as possible so that I could have options. And then when I got my results, that didn't help because I did well in all. Like I have straight A profiles in the physics and the math and the chemistry and all that. So ideally, I'm a strong science student. But I remember another teacher commented to me. She was like, Rosana, I know you're facing a lot of pressure in the sciences, but at your core, you are an art student. And I don't know, it just lingered in my mind in terms of when I really reflected. And yes, I did well in all of them, but in terms of what came naturally to me, like what was most intuitive, it was the arts. In terms of what I truly enjoyed, it was the arts. Like literature was my favorite subject in the world. Like Miss Chase, like I love her, Miss Gill. Like I loved reading, I loved interpreting the characters. So I started thinking, what do I genuinely love? So yes, I may work hard and do well at all. And that's what led me down the arts path. So at TAMCC, I ended up doing Spanish, French, literature, and law. So by the time I was in Form 4, I got exposed to debating. And that is where my interest in law arose. Because it wasn't something that was on my mind before. I grew up in a household where law wasn't encouraged, actually. Like my mother had a bad experience with the justice system growing up. So she actually didn't like lawyers. And I always heard negative things about the law. So it never was on my radar. But as I got into debating, and I think that's a good thing about the pressure that convent puts on you to be involved in extracurricular activities, like about being a well-rounded student and being exposed, because I got exposed to it through extracurricular activities, through debating. And I realized I quite like this. And that is what made me choose law in one of my subjects at TAMCC.
Okay. So then you get to that point. What was your trajectory after TAMCC? Did you work first or did you go straight on to university?
So after I finished TAMCC, I still wasn't clear. Because once again, I excelled in all my subjects and I wasn't clear on what to study. So I decided to go and teach. So I taught at St. Joseph's Convent for a year. So I taught based on the subjects I did. So I taught Spanish, I taught French, and I taught English A. So during that time, I was awarded the Grenada Island Scholarship. And I was told I had to do it within a particular time. So that put some pressure on me in terms of, okay, you need to figure out what you're doing with your life.
Yeah.
By that time, I knew teaching was not for me. Like I enjoyed that 1 year. And I think because I knew it was 1 year, I poured my all into it, but I knew it was not sustainable. Every day I came home drained, like dealing with these children just took everything out of me. I'm like, how do people do this? Because both my parents were teachers at some point in their lives. It's like, how do people do this day in, day out? It's a vocation. God bless teachers, especially dealing with the younger ones. That really tested my patience. So I knew I couldn't be doing this for too long. And during that time, it was the time of the US elections when Obama was running about hope. And I used to spend a lot of my evenings looking at CNN and those programs. And that's where my interest in political science and decision making, why people do what they do, why people choose what they choose. So that's where my interest in political science arose. And that's why when I was looking at programs in UWI, the political science and law degree attracted me because the program had elements of both that interested me. So that is what led me down that path at the time.
Okay. And then even, I'm getting a little bit into the weeds now, but even in choosing to go to UWI, was it kind of just your first path? Like, okay, I'm going to go to UWI because I have this island scholarship. So you just looked at what UWI offered?
Yes. So I didn't really have a choice. It was like, if you are getting a Grenada Island scholarship, you have to, at that time, because before, I know people used to be able to go to Cambridge here, but by that time, they offered more of those scholarships. So they limited you. So you either had to do SDU or UWI unless it was some sort of degree that couldn't be offered there. Right. And what I wanted to do could be. So UWI was my only option.
Okay.
And I have no regrets at all going to a Caribbean university created for us, by us. So no regrets at all having gone to UWI Cave Hill campus.
Represent. Okay. All right. So in all of that, so you had a little bit of job experience, kind of started figuring out what you wanted versus didn't want. And then you talked about having to kind of make that choice again while at university. Once you decided that it was law, Walk us through that process. So deciding on it and then going down that course and then eventually finding your first job.
Okay, so in terms of I couldn't switch to law until after my first year. So it's 3 years at UE.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got there and I started to understand the dynamics better, I was advised that I needed to switch. I couldn't switch in my first year. So I did my first year as what we call a cross-faculty student. So I did a mixture of political science courses and law courses. I was doing things like statistics and all sorts of different things. So to get on the law path, ideally, I would need to spend an extra year. But I was on a scholarship, and they were not going to pay for an additional year because law was already 5 years, which was wider than what the scholarship envisaged. The scholarship was meant to be a 3-year program. Now I'm asking them to cover 5, and then I'm asking them for 1 more. So it just wasn't going to happen. So that meant I had to take on extra courses than my colleagues so I could finish in the same time like them. So that was stressful. I won't pretend that it was easy having to do 6 courses every semester when everybody else was doing 5. But what I realized about myself is that I work best under pressure. Like that is how I thrive. It's not ideal, but it's the truth. It's how I function. So I think having to do more pushed me further. And I was also very involved in school. So in extracurricular has always been a very important thing to me. So I was very involved in student life. So it just meant a lot of hard work, a lot of long nights. I started drinking coffee. I didn't like coffee growing up. I the smell, everything, but that's the only way I could stay up. I was drinking Monster, doing all sorts of unhealthy things. I remember in an exam, I was jittering because, I was drinking so many energy drinks to be able to stay up. So I won't pretend that it was easy, but I think everybody who is looking at this knows that anything worth having isn't easy. Like you have to put in the work. There's no shortcut or anything like that. So I was able to excel. So I got a first-class degree honors in law, which isn't popular. Like few people get it, but it is a challenging program. But as I say, I had the 3 years. I had to get it done, and I got it done.
Very nice.
And then we went on to law school, which was 2 years in Trinidad. That one was less academic. It was slightly different, but I still did well. It was still interesting. It was slightly less rigorous because now I was on the same footing as my peers. I was doing the same amount of work as them. There was a lot of group work, I remember, in that as well. But I got along very well with my colleagues, and I would say it went pretty smoothly.
Okay, great. So at this point, you're full-fledged on the track to be a lawyer.
Yes.
So once you leave, that would be Hugh Whitting in Trinidad?
Yes, Hugh Whitting Law School, yeah.
Right. Once you leave, what happens next? How do you go about finding a firm to practice with? Was it always the plan to come back to Grenada? How did that happen?
Yes. So being on a scholarship, I had to come back to Grenada. And I thought that, I would be able to be placed with the government because I wanted to work in the Attorney General's chambers. And that was my ideal thing. I liked working for the state, representing the state in different matters. So that is where I wanted to be. I started in our first year of law school, we have to do what's called an internship or an in-service training. And that's where most people would start strategizing about where they're going to work. So they would try to intern there and then get the job. But I was once again on my whole passion, what I find most interesting and intriguing. Yeah. So I went to apply to work at the Court of Appeal in St. Lucia. Okay. So that it was competitive. The judges came down, you were interviewed. It was a whole process. But I went to do that. So when everybody was home strategizing law firms, I was in St. Lucia at the Court of Appeal, learning about how to write judgments, learning about how the court system works. So yes, very interesting, but in terms of career path, perhaps not the most strategic of decisions. But once again, I have no regrets. The level of exposure, understanding of the judicial system, and so that I got there, it was incredible. But then now, when it was time to start to think about where I was working, so I wrote, to apply to the Ministry of Legal Affairs and all that. And then at the time, Grenada was facing structural adjustment. We're not currently hiring. And it's like, ooh, where am I going to work? Like, the reality of,
Yeah.
what's going to happen here? So
Mhm.
I just started sending applications far and wide. And I think it's well known in Grenada that most people who tend to study law tend to have some sort of link to a law firm, either their parents, their grandparents, their auntie, their uncle. So I was one of the few people in my class that had no links. Like nobody in my family was a lawyer. I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't develop relationship with lawyers like that. Like
Yeah.
it was just like one particular lawyer I had met when I was in TAMCC through my debating and mooting stuff. Like I saw him somewhere when I came on vacation and he was like, apply. And I kind of held on hope to that. But then I sent my application, I called, he wasn't taking me on. So I didn't have any links. So I just sent a bunch of applications out, just sent far and wide. And one person called me back. I was like, ooh. And I went to the interview, or what I thought was an interview, and I found it odd in that it was just a conversation. I'm like, why this person, like, she doesn't know me from anywhere. I don't know, like, we don't know each other. And like, it was just very conversational. Like, you weren't asking me any of the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah.
And then we had a follow-up interview, and then it was just to discuss like salary and when can I start. And I was like, this is how interviews are supposed to go? Because I remember I never had an interview other than the internship, and the internship one was like very, very rigorous. Like even for convent, like when I went to Sister Maureen for the interview, she's like, Rosana, your interview started 5 years ago.
Right.
It's like, I have been observing you for a long time. Like, so like I was surprised then too that the interview was a conversation. It's only years after I found out that a full investigation was launched on me. And she called multiple people, and that's when I started to understand the importance of your reputation, how you treat people, how you deal with people, how you are perceived by others, because that was very important in landing me that job. And because I said the interview was a conversation.
Wow.
But
So
she
you
had
had
done
no
her full
idea.
due diligence on me and got good reports that she felt comfortable hiring somebody that she didn't know.
So by the time you walked into that office for the conversation, she already knew basically that you were good for the job.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because only years later, speaking to somebody else, they told me that, she had called them and she had called this other person. I was like, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. Wow.
And all this was happening in the background.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So maybe you kind of answered this question already, but in this whole process, whether, from school or once you actually started, did you have anyone that you considered a mentor along the way, or at any point was there someone that you can kind of go to for guidance or assistance?
Not formally. So in terms of when I started working, I am very happy I started working where I did. I think it was very important in shaping who I am today in terms of, because when we were in law school, the focus was a lot on academia and being bright and who has the fanciest legal arguments. So that is how I was trained for 5 years. So I go into a law firm and that's all I know. I had no previous experience with the internship or anything else.
Yeah.
So I remember on my very first day of work, I was given a legal opinion to do on a matter. And, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling, I know this area, I know this. So I put down what I considered to be a brilliant legal opinion, and I submitted to my boss, and it comes back with a bunch of red marks. So that was like a big blow to my ego. It's like, what is going on here? She's like, Rosana, nobody cares. Okay, you need to make this very simple, very clear. The client just wants to know what they can. They don't need all this analysis. They don't need, you need to make your advice brief and practical.
Yeah.
And so like I learned how to change my manner of thinking. I learned about all the different things that go into being a good lawyer. In terms of the focus in school, as I keep saying, is just on academia. But being bright doesn't necessarily make you a good lawyer in terms of customer service, managing client expectations, balancing different clients, like all those different skills. I was able to learn both from my boss and from the other experienced paralegals and persons at the firm. So that really helped to mold and shape me into understanding the business of law. And in terms of being a professional, it's not just about what you know, but about how you translate and deal with people and that sort of thing. So that was very instrumental. And I've seen persons that haven't had that sort of support, that perhaps in like other countries, for instance, where law is far more competitive, there are people that can't get into a law firm. They have to branch out on their own right away and that sort of thing. So I've seen the difference that having that level of support can make in how you develop as a lawyer.
Interesting. Okay, and so you've made a few moves since then, since that first job. Past 10 years, you say.
Yeah, this year will be 10. Doesn't feel that much.
Wow, congrats. And I feel like from the outside looking in that like your path might be a little less traditional than others in the space locally. So I don't know if you agree with that, but what was it like making moves from that point, from the beginning to where you are now, and kind of finding your interests, weaving your interests into the career along the way?
So once I started practicing, I was exposed once again the type of law firm I started working with of a wide variety of areas. So I got to see a lot of different things. And I always knew I wanted to do a master's, but I didn't know, once again, what I wanted to do it in. So I decided to wait a few years and just practice, get into practice, see what I liked, see what I didn't like. And that's where I didn't necessarily get the exposure at my workplace, but more just in terms of just globally, in terms of seeing what are the problems that we're facing, where do we lack expertise, and that sort of thing. And that's where I decided that perhaps I should focus on environmental law. So I started my focus on it at law school. We had what we call clinics, where we got to interact with lawyers and learn about some things. So I had gotten exposure from law school. But in terms of my everyday practice at the firm, I didn't do any environmental law. I didn't really encounter it. And I realized the fact that I wasn't encountering it, the fact that nobody else I knew had that level of expertise, showed that there was a gap, that this is what was needed. So I applied for a Chevening Scholarship to do environmental law. So this was, at that time, I was about 3 or 4 years into practice. So yes, I decided, you know what, I've worked enough, I have a fair idea of what is involved. I feel comfortable going to specialize in that area. So for 1 year, I was in the United Kingdom. I was at UCL and I read for a master's in environmental law and policy. It was a wonderful year. Because I went to UE, so it was my first time studying outside of the Caribbean.
Right.
And I think I really appreciated UE even more in terms of the caliber of education that I received. And these are people from all over the world, and it's like we are up there right with them. Like when I saw the kind of questions and things students were asking and I'm like, we would never, So it really reassured and enforced to me how valuable the foundation I received at UE was. So it was like person from all over the world, like I keep saying, a very global university. And it was just a very enlightening experience. There, I got exposed to concepts that I had no idea about that were so relevant to us here in the region. Like now, I think everybody knows about loss and damage. But 6 years ago, it was an unknown concept to me. It was an unknown concept to most. So in terms of like climate reparations, the fact that we contribute the least towards climate change, experience it the most, how can we get justice for this, climate justice? So all these concepts, I started to get exposed to them. And that's what I ended up doing my thesis on in terms of climate finance. How do we get compensated for the effects that we are feeling for climate change that we did not cause? So I came back to Grenada on fire. Like with all this new knowledge, it's like, you know what, we need our money, we need our rights. And then it's like everything is business as usual. Like I'm in the Ministry of the Environment. I'm trying to see like what can I do? How can I share my experience, my expertise? At the time I was with an organization called CYEN.
Okay.
So I'm like, how can we I'm just one person. So how can I share my knowledge, my experience, and So like I became a little disillusioned when, you come back with all this fire and then there's nowhere to channel it to. It's like, oh, I'll get back to you. So you just fall into that kind of thing. As I say, my interest was originally to work with government. Even then, in terms of how can I, because to me, that is where decision making happens, in terms of what is like this kind of inertia. So I ended up going back to the same law firm I was at, doing the exact same thing I was doing before.
Which had nothing to do with environmental, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so it's like I felt a little frustrated in terms of, what am I doing with this?
Yeah.
And then I had to stay in Grenada again because that scholarship. So I had a 5-year bond the first time around from my Grenada Island scholarship, and then I had a further 2-year bond from this one. Because a lot of people always like, why are you in Grenada? Like, other people like always like, why are you still here? And like Grenada's holding me back kind of thing. Yeah. But it's like I received from this nation, I should give back to this nation. So it's like I was always comfortable. There are people who have broken the bond. There are people who never came back. So I don't think there's any police that is here going to beat you if you don't do it. But it's just the ethical and moral thing to do, in that you signed that you would return and that you should return. Yeah. But I was just a little disillusioned that I wasn't using, my skills for
what you
that I thought they could be used. And to this day, the problem still persists. So I wouldn't say it's been resolved and this is a happy ending. But I did get some opportunities through pushing. Like I ended up going to the Youth Climate Summit. That was in 2019. So I don't know if you remember that speech where Greta Thunberg was like, how dare you?
Yes.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
I was there in person for that. I know that was so chilling. And I remember going to all these meetings in the UN. And then I kind of left a little disillusioned from that too, in terms of these are just meetings and talks. And, when is real change happening? The name of my thesis was Show Me the Money. Like I want concrete things, like all these policies and talks. And so even with the UN process, I'm like, this isn't what I thought it was. Just a lot of talking and meetings and pictures. Yeah. And no real change is actually happening. And then COVID came. So whatever perhaps momentum could have arisen about me, like having represented Grenada there, and so kind of died down COVID, and then priorities shifted. And that's what I think.
Life happened.
Keep listening. We'll be right back after a short break.
You might be wondering how we find the guests who make it on the show. A lot of it is through my own network and the network of the team and our friends and acquaintances. Sometimes I'll hear about someone in a non-traditional field and reach out to see if they'd be willing to join as a guest. Other times, I'll specifically go looking for someone in an industry that I don't think gets much spotlight, and I'll just cold email them. But my favorite way to find guests is when you, the listeners, make suggestions. You can do that by sending a direct message to any of our social media pages, or more formally, by going to our Cutly short link at cut.ly/pathwaysguest. That's CUTT.ly/pathwaysguest. Now, you can suggest yourself or someone who you think would be a great fit for the show. They don't have to be in one of the STEAM fields, but it's preferred if they're doing something that's a little less traditional or just not very talked about. A great litmus test to know if someone will be a fit is if you're a follower of Pathways and you would like to hear this person's story on the podcast. Our listeners know best. So send us a note at CUTT.ly/pathwaysguest. And you might just hear from the person you suggested on an upcoming episode.
And we're right back to the conversation.
Okay, so I'll take a bit of a detour now, and then we'll see how things weave their way back together. But you've also, in recent years, probably around the same time, COVID time, started some more entrepreneurial pursuits outside of law. I think it all began with the Instagram page and your food, but like talk about that. So you now have Spice Foodie Tours, you have your Instagram page where you kind of rate and review different restaurants around the island. So how did that begin? Let's talk about how that began.
So as you say, with the pandemic. So I've always loved food and so, but the pandemic was a shift for me in that I wasn't coping well with it. Like I'm a person that I like to have structure, I like plans, I like to know what's happening. And that's exactly what the pandemic was not. Like initially we were told that we would be home for 2 weeks, then we would come back. So I'm like, okay. And then it changed, and then supermarket days, this day, then it changes. So it was just very dynamic. And, as I said, I wasn't coping well with it. So I was like, one of the ways that I found to cope was by cooking. There were like several recipes I had saved that I never got around to doing. So, that helped me add structure to my day. So it's like, because I was working remotely, my job, fortunately, I was able to remain employed. I was able to continue working, but I still had more time than I usually would. So that gave me some structure that, I would try to make different dishes every day. And, I really loved presenting them nicely, photographing them and all that stuff. And I used to share it on my personal Instagram page.
Okay.
And I used to get mixed reviews about it. Some people, they liked it. And some people were like, why are you always posting food? This is annoying. You're making me hungry. Like they didn't want to see food every day. Like that's not what they signed up for, when, like when they were following me. So eventually, since I was doing it so consistently, I'm like, I should make a separate space for just people who want to see the food I'm making. Okay. So the page started with me with my own quarantine creations. So as outside started to open up more and I started to get busy again, I wasn't cooking as much. So the attention shifted to reviewing restaurants. And I think I was the only person that was consistently doing this. So I started to build a following. And so I've been doing this for the past 4 years. And people started to want more than just like watching it on Instagram. Yeah. Like, are we going to do a food tour? Are we going to go to tour different restaurants? And to be honest, I found that to be a bit overwhelming and that I didn't know where that would start, like how that would look like. It's like, I have work, like I have a 9 to 5, like touring with people. It just wasn't sustainable. So it's like, I just kept seeing the reasons why it couldn't work. Right. So there was always that question from different people, but it's like, oh, it won't work. I don't have the time. And I just, as I said, figured out all the ways why I couldn't do it. Then fast forward now, we are in 2023. So I am 3 years into doing this. And I go to an event called Island Innovators, put on by a company called Brazen. And at that event, it's meant to be like a business mixer where you get to interact with different people. So it's there that I met Dylan Charles of Real Grenadian Taxis and Tours. I believe I was following him on social media, but I didn't actually know him. So we met there, we spoke. They had a second edition of the Island Innovators event. We met there again and we also spoke, but it was just like general conversation, not anything specific, but at least we knew each other. So in terms of when I saw him post on social media, I saw him post about him wanting to do a food tour because he was inspired to do it because David's been here, a food blogger, had visited Grenada and he was responsible for transporting David around. And that opened his eyes to the fact that, because he did traditional tours, the waterfalls and all that, that food could also be a product, a tourism product. Funny enough, I was the one that introduced David to the GTA, and GTA was the one that had put David onto him. Because one of apparently David had put out a post saying, he's coming to Grenada, he doesn't know what to do. And one of the persons who follows my page, messaged me and says, hey, this guy is asking, about foods, so I reached out to him. And based on what he wanted, I'm like, the GTA would be the best partner for this. And I introduced him to GTA. And then I just exited screen left. I didn't think about that again.
Yeah.
So it was just funny how that kind of came full circle, that he got inspired by the food tour because of that same food blogger. So
Interesting.
Dylan decided, he's the one that said, like, we're gonna have a food tour. So I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. I want to come. Like, I want to see, what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, sure. So like we spoke about it, and I put out a post on Instagram, we're looking to do a food tour. Dylan is looking to do a food tour. Who wants to come with me? Kind of thing. So I was more like a guest.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't my tour. I'm just here to check it out, to promote it, to critique it, kind of thing.
Okay.
So I went on it, and I got some people to come too, and I really enjoyed it. So afterwards, like, I had a conversation with him on how it could be improved and what could be done. And the initial plan was that, I would help promote it, and I would just get a cut from people I got to go.
Yeah.
But then I got more and more and more involved in terms of, organization, planning. That is like, it's like, Rosana, we might as well do this together, because
Right.
basically planning the whole thing. So it was like, that is how I kind of got, I
Pulled
didn't
into it
choose to
almost.
do this. I kind of ended up in
Yeah.
it.
Wow.
But had it been up to me alone,
Yeah.
I tell you, I would not be doing a food tour. I would still be thinking about the ways that it couldn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Given this way that things kind of fell together and you got into it, what was that like? Because you had in your head all these ideas why it couldn't work, but then you kind of ended up doing it anyway. And then what was next? Did it just kind of, fit smoothly into the process? Was it just easier than you thought it would be? What was the process growing that?
It changed my mindset, in that I was the type of person that everything had to be organized and clear and perfectly planned before launch.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed me the importance of learning through doing, of progress over perfection. Just do it and figure it out while you go. Because a lot of the changes and stuff we had to implement, I could not have foreseen it had I not done it.
Right.
So it really forced me to, like, let's just do it. I don't have it all figured out. I don't know exactly how everything is going to go, but let's just try it. We'll learn, we'll improve. And so it really helped me in that regard. I had no business experience. I never did any POB, POA. Like, I had zero interest in business growing up.
Uh-huh.
I grew up with parents that worked for people, like entrepreneurship, like that sort of thing was never on my radar. So I also had to do a lot of learning in terms of, customer service and all the things that go into running an effective business. So I'm still learning. I just finished a Branson Entrepreneurship Incubator, an 8-week training. I'm always listening to podcasts. So it's a constant work in progress, in terms of just developing that business acumen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been very rewarding, very, 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 very rewarding. As I say, the people I've met, the things I've learned, and just, as I say, just doing things, just trying things. Like this Friday, we're trying another product. Like, sometimes you think you know what people want and they don't. It's like, why? Because we've tried to launch different tours and everybody is still just stuck with Taste of Labe. Like, sometimes like, I am tired of that tour. It's like, people don't want to do something else. Like, they just love that one, and they go, why don't they love the other one too? And just figuring out things and trying different things, and just being okay if it doesn't work out. Like, moving on, not taking things personally. So there's a lot of growth. And then dealing with a business partner, because it's not just me. It's me and someone, being able to delegate tasks. So we have an assistant, knowing, being able to communicate clearly what your expectations are, putting together standard operating procedures so that you don't have to keep repeating everything all the time. So it's just been a lot of learning in this past year. So Spice Foodie Tour turned a year this June. So it's still a very young business. So lots and lots of learning.
Okay. So a 2-part question to that is, is there somewhere that you go, or that you kind of are able to get support from locally in the growing of that business? And, off of that, what has been most instrumental to you in growing this kind of entrepreneurial side. So it's twofold in the sense of what has helped grow the business, but also like what has helped you become more entrepreneurial.
So I would say that there isn't, as far as I'm aware, a central business resource in Grenada. I think it has been a lot easier for me because I am an attorney at law. I have been practicing in Grenada for some time, so I am familiar with a lot of the processes because I have helped clients, incorporate companies and start businesses. So I am familiar with the process. I think for persons on the outside, it can be a bit challenging in terms of just knowing where to go, knowing what to do. The information I do not believe is easily available. Like you do a Google search or you go to ChatGPT, what they're telling you on ChatGPT is not correct. Like I forgot the technical term when AI lies.
Yeah.
But it's not true what ChatGPT is telling you.
Wow.
So I think there is a barrier. There is that barrier to entry in terms of doing business in Grenada that a lot of things you may not need a lawyer for, but because you do not know where to go, a lawyer is needed to guide you. And since I'm already a lawyer, I am the one that handles all those sort of things for the company. So we've changed our different types of registration as we've evolved. I've been able to do that. I've been able to know about tax registration and all those things because of my knowledge as a lawyer. But I am aware that the average person may not know about these things. And that's a need that we have recognized dealing with small businesses. So for those who are unfamiliar with Spice Foodie Tours, we don't make any food ourselves. We are basically a matchmaker. We put you together with different food vendors in Grenada. Most of them tend to be smaller vendors, and most of them tend to be based in rural Grenada. So many of them, they end up in business. So they didn't have like a business plan and they decided that they would be doing X, Y, Z. They kind of fall into it. So some of them may not even have business bank accounts. They're still merging their business funds with their personal funds. They're not registered. And in terms of that formality that we often envisage with business, it's not there. In terms of just business training, like they're just selling food. So in terms of just understanding business aspects, so then they want to get a loan, they have no records of their finances and it becomes a challenge. So dealing with these small businesses regularly, because as a regular lawyer, I wouldn't encounter those types of persons. The persons that tend to come to lawyers tend to be a bit more sophisticated. So it really opened my eyes to how much of the informal business sector exists in Grenada and how many people genuinely just don't know in terms of how to formally go about it, and there's nobody there to mentor them. I'm aware that there is GIDC and these organizations, but still many people don't know. So that is, we've decided to launch Smart Supports. It's not fully launched. We are still grappling with it because we are busy running Spice Foodie. We each have our own other things doing, but we think it's important to be able to offer support to businesses. So we've started with the businesses we work with in terms of telling them the importance of having a separate bank account, helping them with different things. So that is how we've started with the businesses that we've dealt with. But we would want to do it on a wider scale in terms of just being a resource that people can come to our page. The initial vision is for it to just be on social media. Eventually, perhaps when we have more bandwidth, it can be something bigger. But you want to know how to incorporate a company in Grenada, you know where to go, you know what the fees are, so that it's just clear what your steps are, as opposed to you going on Google and seeing 5-6 different things and you're still not clear. So we would want to offer that support to businesses through our page, Smart Support.
And so Smart Support would be kind of like an offshoot of the Spice Foodie business, the same partnership?
Yeah, so lessons we've learned from running
I love that. Okay. Yeah, that's a really necessary idea. I have this problem all the time, though. So with a lot of things locally, it's kind of expected that you know the process so that you can figure it out. And there's no guidance anywhere, to say, well, if you want to do this, X, Y, Z is the step. So that's a great initiative. Do you have, throughout your career, legal wise and also on the entrepreneur side? Is there like a favorite failure that you had? So you mentioned that you kind of learned to now go with the flow a bit more. Is there anything that has maybe in the initial instance seemed like a failure or something that you weren't doing well at, and then it became a great learning lesson to you?
Like no specific instance jumps out, but like one of the things that came to mind is like when we first started doing the tour, people would just show up. So you weren't required to like pay beforehand. So you would just show up and you would just like tell us the food you wanted on the day. Like we were doing this for like a month, 2 months.
Yeah.
And looking back at that now, it seems crazy based on how many times we got burnt because people say they're coming, then they don't show up because they didn't pay. So there is no commitment. People saying that, people indicating that, they want this food. Then at that moment, they change their minds and they want something else. And then you already spoke to the business person about something else. So in terms of having that structure, it really showed us the importance of structure. So right now we have a registration form. So it is very clear what your food choices are. So if you chose pork and on the day you show up and you want chicken, we can try to accommodate you. But if there isn't enough, like you can't be getting on. Some people can be very, it showed me the not so nice side of humans too, but that's a separate story. That, you chose this, so we catered for this. And that, you paid beforehand, so you have to come, or you should come, or else you lose your money or follow a cancellation policy. So in terms of just learning to deal with people and learning to move around, to navigate those things about, during carnival time, because we have our policies. And sometimes we try to, to be lenient and it's like, okay, we'll let you pay on the day. We keep getting burnt. So it's like we have to stick to our policies. They're there for a reason, especially like during carnival time and stuff. People, my head hurting, and they don't come and they promise the night before that they would and they beg and they plead. And then the next day, my head hurting. But once they pay, they will sleep on the bus, they will do whatever, but they will show up.
Right.
So it's just navigating that has been learning about stick to your policies, no matter how much they beg, how much they plead, like stick to your policies is what is one thing. Because we end up losing when because most of the food on the tour tends to be catered, so we can ensure you get it in a reasonable time.
Okay.
Because there are people who've seen our itineraries and decide, we're gonna do this on our own. And that's fine because we don't own any of those businesses. You can do the tour on your own. But then you're waiting 3 and 4 hours for food and, but when we plan it, it flows
everything's ready.
A lot better. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, those are definitely important lessons, I would say. Okay, so what do you see for yourself? I know you said, 5 years, things could change drastically. But do you have like a trajectory in mind for your career where you kind of would like to see things go?
I don't have anything specific that I would want to disclose, but in terms of some general themes that I want for myself, I value flexibility a lot, and financial freedom is something that's very important to me as well. So that is definitely the direction that I'm working towards. So, and I've released the need to have everything figured out. Like I've changed a lot, evolved a lot in the years. It's like, because 3 years ago, if you told me I would have a food tour business, I would be like, what? 5 years ago, you tell me I'd have a food blog, I'd be like, what? So in terms of just appreciating life's journey and just watching where it takes you. So so I'm just like excited about like, where will I end up? Because it's like where I am now, I would not have predicted. Like it was not in the plan. And so I'm just like releasing that need to have everything specific and I'm going to be here, there, and everywhere. And just embracing more general principles that I would want to hold on to and just looking forward to the journey.
Yeah, I love that. And then just to tie things up more for the listener's perspective, but where you are right now in your legal practice, what exactly is it that you do now? And kind of like where have you settled at this point?
So I still practice as an attorney at law, but I now practice with a different type of firm. So I started off at a traditional family firm based in Grenada.
Mm-hmm.
I now work with a global firm that is the largest law firm in the world, Dentons. They have branches all over the world, including the Caribbean. So I lead the Grenada office. And one of the things that's different is that I get to do more of a wider variety of areas. I also practice in Anguilla. So through working in that law firm, I got exposure to different, to the laws of different Caribbean islands. So I'm admitted to the bar in Anguilla as well. So I do work there while being based in Grenada. So that has really opened my eyes to a whole new legal landscape. Yeah. And I do get to exercise more of my environmental law aspect as well, in terms of through something called ESG, Environmental Social Governance, which looks at corporate sustainability, how companies affect people and the planet, and the ways that companies can do their part when it comes to addressing environmental issues. So in this part of the world, it's still unregulated, but in other places, including the US, which is very close to us, public companies have to report on the environmental impact in Europe and in other places, and it will eventually get here. So it's not just on the state anymore, on countries. Companies also have a responsibility to mitigate, to address climate change and different environmental things. So it will be coming here. So a lot of the work that I have been doing is more training and awareness and that sort of thing. But I do envisage in the next few years, it will be a lot more hard law in terms of compliance. And companies having to do certain things. So it's a new and evolving area. I'm learning a lot too, because it's constantly changing. That's the thing about environmental law. It's one of the newer areas of law compared to like land law and contract and those things. So that has been exciting.
Okay, and out of curiosity, how did that shift happen? So how did you end up with Dentons basically? And you mentioned that it's global, but you practice in Grenada. So is it that you only like take cases or work on things locally and in Anguilla, or are you exposed to work in multiple countries as well?
So yes, I'm exposed to multiple countries. So a lot of the work I do is quote unquote group work, because a lot of our clients are not, so the average client I deal with is not based in Grenada.
Okay.
And the average client I deal with is not an individual. So the average client tends to be companies, and they see the Caribbean as one space. So they're like, we want to do this in the Caribbean. Let me know how I could do it in Jamaica, Trinidad, Grenada, Guyana.
Okay.
So like weekly, I have like group meetings with my colleagues because we need to coordinate our responses, make sure that, everything lines up. And so I get to see how things operate in their countries. And a lot of it is very similar. A lot of it is very different. So it's a lot of quote unquote group work in terms of the clients they rarely just want to find out about Grenada. They see us as one regional space. And it emphasizes to me, that we are one Caribbean. The world sees us that way. Yet we see ourselves so individually.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that regional and even global interaction, but mostly regional. In terms of how I ended up there, once again, relationships. And I cannot emphasize if it's one thing about the importance of cultivating good relationships in terms of, once again, how you treat people, how you deal with people, how you're perceived. I think now it's called your brand and your personal brand, but it's your reputation in terms of like a lot of those people are people I met at university. So once again, with that same job, I expected rigorous interviews. And so I did have an interview, but it wasn't as rigorous as I expected, having done, interviews that are rigorous. And then once again, I found out that due diligence was done on me. And it wasn't done at the Grenada level because my boss is not Grenadian, isn't based in Grenada. But he was able to ask people who went to UWI with me, and people were able to vouch. And that is what, what separated me and what helped to choose me. So in terms of your time in university, yes, you're hanging out, you're having a good time. But when people know that you're a serious person, people know that you're doing your work, they will vouch for you later on. years later, because I had left UE at the time, more than 5-6 years now. And these people were willing to vouch for me.
So it's not even people that you've necessarily kept up with over the years.
Yeah, so that emphasized to me like the importance of things like LinkedIn, and I know some people want to be private, and so that's why I've started to share more of what I do, because some people may not be speaking to me on a daily basis, but they know, oh, Rosana's doing this, Rosana's up to that, and they know that, because you never know, those people might need to vouch for you down the line.
Yeah.
So if it's one thing that I've noticed in terms of my trajectory is that, yes, hard work is very important, but also your reputation, how you are perceived by people. Because some people are bright, but they're not nice to people. They're not helpful, and people won't recommend you if you're not a helpful or a nice person.
So
in terms of, at the time, I wasn't being strategic or anything about it. So it's like, oh my gosh, imagine if I was something else, perhaps I wouldn't get these opportunities.
Right. It's crazy how things turn out.
Yeah.
But great. Okay, so with all of that, do you have any advice for, I'll say, a young teenager or a young adult who may be at the point of figuring out their next step career-wise? Any advice at all for how they should go about it?
Well, at least now there are a lot more resources out there. Like when I was growing up, like there weren't podcasts and all these different like free resources. Like your traditional thing would be to deal with an actual mentor. So at least now there's a lot more of podcasts and that sort of thing. Access to people is a lot easier too, in terms of things like LinkedIn. You can reach out to people. So like this year alone, a couple of people have reached out to me on LinkedIn for just career questions and talks, and I'm willing to do it. And I'm sure many people don't mind, just having a conversation with you about it. So in terms of just reaching out to people, it's a lot easier. Like the people that I've met with, like virtually and in person, like I didn't know them from anywhere. But I guess they looked at my profile and saw that I was doing things that they were interested in, and they reached out and asked. So people are a lot more accessible. Information is a lot more accessible. And I would say that there is a lot less pressure. Because I remember when I was growing up, like back then it was like one thing, like you would be one thing. Like ever since you're like 3, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's just this one thing that you will be, and this pressure on you to figure it out at 3. And then like right now, you can be several things at once or differently. You can branch off. So I think there isn't that pressure anymore in terms of just being one thing. And in terms of even my own exposure, in terms of having multiple sources of income and not just putting all your eggs in one basket, that's something I've learned much later in life. Because when I was younger, just be this one thing and be it forever. And that pressure, like when I look back on my life, the most stressful time in my life was in Form 5. Until when I was doing CXC. Like I thought my entire future fell on my CXC results. Like I lost weight, I wasn't eating. I was like, my mother had to sit down and make sure I was eating food because I was just so stressed. But it's like, if I don't do well on CXC, my entire future will shatter and fall apart. Because I felt that pressure from my teachers, from everybody, the so-called bright person is supposed to perform. So it was a lot of pressure. But then I realized that the whole world doesn't depend on your CXC results. When I look now in terms of people who are the doctors or the PhD holders, some of them aren't those who were traditionally bright in school. People learn at different paces, at different times, and the people who thought sometimes who would be on top aren't the ones. So it's like there's life after secondary school. Like it's like breathe. Like don't put so much pressure on yourself. So yes, work hard, focus, apply yourself, all those things, but you don't need to have it all figured out. You can change your degree later on. You can change your path. So it's like less pressure. It's one of the things I would say that.
I'm like getting goosebumps as you're saying this, because it's just so true. And it's a lot of people, I think, still don't realize that at that age, of course, because it feels like you are deciding your whole life, at the age of 15. So I really think it's important. I hope this message reaches who it needs to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Rosana, thank you so very much. If there's any way that people want to reach out to you to ask you some questions, find out more about what you do, what would be the best way for that?
I would suggest LinkedIn. So it's my name, Rosana with one N. Rosana John is my name on LinkedIn. I am responsive on there. If you're interested more in the creative side of things, you can check me out on Instagram, Radical Rose Eats, so Radical with a K, or Spice Foodie Tours, either one of those, and you can reach me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sure that the listeners have gotten something to take away from today's episode. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Arlene. And by the way, Arlene was a former student of mine.
I was.
In terms of coaching and knowledge bowl in convent. So
yes.
We go way back.
Good times. And to the listeners, thank you for joining us on today's Pathway.
Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to leave a comment wherever you found us today and let us know what you think about this episode. If you liked this one, I think you might like this next one even more. Go check it out and let me know.